Hello, friends. This is Tillery Timmons-Sims, your host for another episode of Conservation Stories. Conservation Stories is a podcast that's brought to you by the Sand Hill Area Research Association, or SARA, as most of you know us as. And we are excited today to have Lee Lancaster join us because we are going to have a conversation about something that I have been curious about for a long time. And this is some things that happened in the 70s and 80s that I remember from my childhood being on the farm. It was an ag movement, and my dad was involved in it. And I remember taking my dad to the airport, which was a big deal in the 70s. And I remember him being gone, and I knew what was happening, understood what was happening, but I never really knew what was the outcome. And so recently I discovered that the folks that were part of this movement actually meet in Lubbock for a reunion. And it was at this movement that I met Lee. And so Lee, thank you for being here to help update and educate me and all of our friends here on the American agricultural movement.
Thank you for asking. I hope I can fill in all the blanks, or at least most of them.
So, as you can tell, Lee is not from Texas. So he has written a book on the history of Georgia. Correct?
Yes.
Yes, that's what I was like. Wasn't I? Georgia, and its involvement in the American agricultural movement, and hoping one day to write one about Texas because there's some really great folks. I met some great folks at that meeting that were involved during that time. So Lee, how in the world did you find out about this movement, and what really was it?
Well, it was in 2022. You remember we had the Ottawa trucker strike, and they didn't want to take the COVID shot, and it spilled over into the U.S. And there was a truck convoy that it made its way to the Beltway in Washington, and they did not allow them onto the streets of Washington. And we really don't know what happened to that truck convoy. And one of the commentators said it could end up like the tractors did when they came to Washington. And I worked with the Georgia Department of Agriculture, and I'm a contributing writer to the Market Bulletin. And I was talking to the editor about what I had heard, and she told me to do some research on it to see if we could come up with something. And just so happened my daddy went to Atlanta in 1977 to the Farmers Rally, which was the real big thing back in 77. And everybody was there. Anybody that was over 14 years old that was a farmer drove to Atlanta and drove around the Capitol. And nobody talks about it anymore. So it was not that hard to find people that were involved. And once you got them going, they contributed gladly to the situation. Former Commissioner of Agriculture Gary Black was good friends with a man from Unadilla, and I called him, and he gave me 25 or 30 people to talk to and really helped me out. And we uncovered a lot of folks that were still around, still in the agriculture heavy and involved in the organizations. And I ended up buying a book off of Thrift Books called From the White House to the Hooskow. And that book was written by Gerald McCathern. And Gerald McCathern is the man that his hologram is inside the tractor tractor over at the
Fiber Max in Lubbock.
Absolutely. Gerald McCathern wrote that book. That book ended on April the 5th of 1978. And I was born on April the 18th of 1978.
Okay.
And so obviously I didn't have any recollection of it. But Gerald McCathern also wrote a book called Gentle Rebels that I found later. And it picked up where that ended up, and it carried them on into what we know as the Tractorcade to DC. Okay. And there were a lot of farmers named in those books, and a lot of them were still around, and a lot of them I knew. And it was just amazing. And I love talking to these folks, and you get a recording device like this. I learned how to record people. I learned how to interview people. I learned how to hush and let them talk. And I learned how to dictate and stuff like that. And it went from there. And I'm telling you, it's just something.
Did you have any intention of writing a book at the beginning of all this?
When I talked to Terrell Hudson, I was writing all my information down on a Georgia Power envelope, and I was writing it all down, and that's where it all went. Wow. And I talked to these folks, and I was recording the conversations that we were having, and like I said, I had the intention of writing about a 1,400 word, 1,500 word article for the Market Bulletin. So no, I was not intending on writing a book at that point. But then once April and May came, and the article came out in June, I got in touch with a couple of publishers, and one of them I'm still using to this day. And they came up with they were excited about it, and they told me, they said, yeah, we want to do this thing. Here's you need to do your bibliography. So it took almost as long to do the bibliography as it did to do the book, because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to cite sources and things like that. So it was a learning curve for real.
Yeah, I bet that's the truth. I'd have issues with that too. Chat GPT, I'm looking at you. So
I don't know what that is.
AI. So so I remember seeing a couple of years ago in maybe even more than that, seeing that in the Fibermax Museum, going, and it just kind of stopped me in my tracks, because I hadn't thought about it in years, and when I did think about it, I had vivid memories of that movement, but I didn't know that. I don't guess I had thought about, like, oh, this is an important time in history, and we need to make sure that we're acknowledging and keeping all of this information together, for the next generation. And so, can you give us a little bit of background about, like, where it started and why?
Well, the national movement started in Campo, Colorado, which is right across the border from I reckon the Oklahoma Panhandle.
Okay.
I really don't know what the Panhandle of Texas is. I think that's where I reckon that's where Amarillo is. And so anyway, it's over across the border from there and New Mexico. It's in that Four Corners area. And there were 5 farmers that got together in Campo, and then they started talking, and it spread from there. And they had a huge demonstration when the USDA came to Pueblo, Colorado.
Hold on just a minute. Hold on. Oh, thank you. Sorry. We'll have to edit that out. Sorry, I was touching my necklace and it was making noise into the microphone. So there were 5 men. Let's start right back there. There were 5 men.
Yeah, there were 5 farmers that met in a cafe. I think it was in Campo, Colorado, and they got together and they found out that the USDA secretary was going to be in Pueblo, Colorado, a few days later, and so all the tractors from that 4-state area, Kansas as well, they all drove to Pueblo and confronted the USDA secretary there. I think that was in September, maybe the 6th, or somewhere in there.
Right.
And then that's when they started organizing. The farmers made contact with the farmers that knew Jimmy Carter over here in Georgia. Some of the guys from Kansas that just happened to be a city in Kansas called Plains, Kansas. And the farmers from Kansas, Plains, Kansas called some of the farmers in Plains, Georgia. And the farmer that they called, he was kind of pretty close with Jimmy Carter. And he just said, I'm really good friends with Jimmy Carter, but I'll give you a contact with a fella that you may want to talk to. And it ended up getting with the farmers that were organized.
So what amazes me about this was before the internet. I mean, right. It is not like, I mean, I'm a landman by trade. And so I'm always finding people, looking for people in that part of my life. And I cannot even imagine functioning without the internet, trying to find people.
Yeah. They had a phone tree, you'd call this person.
Yes.
And, we call that the prayer list now.
Right. Exactly.
That was what they ended up doing. And
wow.
They, I know there in Georgia, you had two Tommies. You had Tommy Kersey, I think the one that they contacted in Kansas. And then there was Tommy Carter, who ended up just through the grapevine hearing about the movement. And he actually went to the airport, Hartsfield Airport in Atlanta, and met with some of the agriculture movement folks. They flew in to Atlanta, and he met them, and that was the beginnings of the movement there. And he went back to Alma, and they drove to the courthouse in Alma, and then they ended up at the Statesboro courthouse, and then they ended up in Plains the day after Thanksgiving in 77. And Jimmy Carter found out about it, and he went to Camp David instead of coming home to Plains. And so they figured we need to up the ante a little bit. So they ended up in Atlanta at the Capitol, and you had a demonstration in Tallahassee and Columbia, South Carolina, and Dothan, Alabama, Jackson, Mississippi, places like that. Yeah, and that was December 10th.
So give us a little bit of the why, like what was the problem? I mean, we can kind of discuss this a little bit later, but, and I'm kind of thinking it might've been you that told me about the podcast with John Kemp and Michael McNeil. Was that you? Maybe someone else, because it doesn't look like on your face that it was you. So
I'm not a good poker player.
So, but he references Michael McNeil was someone who was working. They basically brought him in to the USDA during the 80s crisis to try to fix things. And he references a document that came out in the 50s from USDA saying, basically, we have too many farmers. And here's what we could do, probably that would help to maybe cut down on how many farmers we have. But they didn't know how, they got the train started and didn't know how to stop it. So technically we think of it as this is what Jimmy Carter did, but I think he inherited the problem too. You were probably in the meeting the other day when they referenced Earl Butts. Yes.
And he pretty much told everybody that, you need to buy a 450 crawler and tear down all of the trees and fence post to fence post. We're going to feed the world. I spent a couple of days trying to find that quote, and I never could find it. And I went back to, the early days of the Nixon administration, never could. And that was pretty much where everybody, they invented larger tractors over 100 horsepower, which is nothing nowadays, obviously.
Right.
But you went from people who remembered plowing with a mule to being able to plow with a 150 horsepower tractor and do whatever they wanted to, and they could grow as much as they wanted to. There was no rails at all, no stops of that. And so you had an overabundance of the storage crops that we had. And the USDA had the farm bill, and the insurance price or loan price for the grains, soybeans, wheat, and corn, they were about 40% of what we had in them to grow them.
That sounds familiar.
And so if I'm a grain trader, I'm not going to give you anything higher than what the loan value is.
Right.
Because I don't have to.
Right.
And that's pretty much what ended up with the people out in Campo. They like, do you see what this farm bill is looking like? And both houses of Congress were Democrat, and you had a Democrat president. So whatever Jimmy Carter wanted, he was going to get.
Sail through. Yeah.
So that's what you ended up with. And the farmers were like, we got to do something. And so the only way they were going to get anybody's attention was, with the tractor cage and stuff like that. And you still had, a lot more farmers. You had way more farmers than you have now.
Yes.
You probably had 100 times as many farmers back in that day than you do now. So
exactly. And a lot of them were smaller because, I think I heard someone give statistics the other day about like how 80% of production agriculture is on 230,000 farmers for 80% of agriculture. So it's an issue, but it's interesting to me that like we're really dealing with the same thing. It's like I am negative this much money when I produce this commodity. I am negative this much money when I produce this commodity. Crazy. So what were they wanting the government to do? Because I always hear we don't really want a handout. We don't want a handout. We just want to have fair prices. So because the government was setting those loan prices. Well, so explain that a little bit. And so just so you'll know, like the audience probably is not like from when we talk about loan prices, you and I are talking the same language, but to other people you're like, well, I don't even know what you're talking about. So explain that piece.
Yeah, the farmers were not wanting charity. They were wanting parity.
Yes, there you go.
And every time I talk to somebody when I have something made, like a shirt or a book or something, people are like, did you misspell party? Because I've never heard of parity.
Because it's not a word we use anymore.
And we're even using parity in the WNBA now, and in the Major League Baseball, NIL with the NCAA stuff.
Too, that's interesting. Yeah.
But parity is basically even. Fairness. Parity is fairness. And the problem that they had was your grains, your crops are traded on a board in Chicago, a board of trade and stuff like that. And so you really don't, there are people that set your price that never put their hands on that crop. And that's what they were wanting somehow to have the system where instead of it being a world market set the price, they were wanting the U.S. government to say, this is where it is right now. They want it up here. And we had parity. They still use parity to set the milk prices. It's in the USDA marketing order for that. So people are like, what's the problem? How come we can't get parity for everything else? And so there's a formula. You've heard the consumer price index. Well, there's also a producer's price index, and it tells you what everything costs to produce down to the acre. And that's how they could figure out that that's where 40% comes from. And then Parity has a small, modest profit involved with it. I'm not talking about doubling the price of it.
Right.
We get into it, and they really wanted Parity to combat poverty and and bankruptcy. And the government, instead of doing that, said, and this is probably going to be familiar even now, because I looked at one of our farmers last week during the meeting. They were talking about this, and I looked at him and I said, they ain't learned a thing in 40 years. They want to give you a loan of small 1-2% loan, 40-year loans on some of this stuff. But if you're making 40% of what it costs to produce,
Right. You're losing. Well, let's say it like this. If you're losing 60% of everything you spend, I mean, like, you don't get paid back for 60%.
yeah,
It's insane. Yeah.
and then they're going to loan you some money. And so you're going to end up with 4 or 5 years. And some of those farmers ended up with $750,000 to $1 million in debt because those farms were just not making anything because that drug on for 3 or 4 years.
And they're in debt to the federal government. And now I think I can't remember what percentage, I just left my mind, of all of ag debt, land debt is in the federal government system, lending system. But I think it's over half. Over half is what it is. I'm like, man, if they called the notes, then the federal government can own, is it the federal government that would own half of the farmland in the United States? I don't know.
Yeah, what a lot of the farmers were thinking though is, I got this money from the government, and so I'm just not going to pay it back. What they're going to do? Well, most of those loans were underwritten by the insurance companies, the folks, MetLife or New York Life. Those kind of things are the names that come up. So just because the government can print money, most of the time when you get a loan from the federal government, it's brokered through a private firm.
Sure, yeah.
And you owe
the bank,
that private firm. And that's one thing that a lot of folks just didn't understand. And so when they started losing their farms, it wasn't the federal government that was on.
It was their neighbor or the guy that's sitting in the pew next to him at church.
Yeah, and a lot of the farms, like I said, went under because Georgia and Louisiana during that period of time in 81 and 82, 75% of the farmers were in danger of bankruptcy back in those days, and that's why they called it the farming crisis.
Yeah, 75%. That's amazing. So what does this all have to do with Farm Aid? Because it does have something to do with Farm Aid.
There was a guy the other day, his name was David Center, and he's from Texas, and he drove a tractor from Texas all the way to Washington, D.C. in 1979. Met with the farmers over in Fulton County, stadium in Atlanta, went right up the interstate, and he met with a guy named Willie Nelson and John. They called him John Cougar Mellencamp at the time. Now he's John Mellencamp.
Yes.
And all of those guys, and they started fundraising in 1985. They went to the University of Illinois football stadium and had the first Farm Aid. And so one of our farmers, the president of the American Agriculture Movement, is also one of the founders of Farm Aid. And that was in 1985, one of the darkest moments in agriculture in 1984, 3, 4, 5, and 6 during that period of time. So that's the connection between Farm Aid and the American Agriculture Movement. And every year I watch it. It's on television, and David Center's always on there, and he's always got that American Agriculture Movement hat on whenever he's on there when they interview him. So,
how did it come to? I guess people were hearing about it on the news. I guess it was national news because people were in every state were pretty much every state were participating in some way. Isn't that correct?
Most of you had some spots where it was a lot more involvement. I've seen most every state, New Mexico, Texas, Kansas, Nebraska, those folks, and then you had the Georgia people. Those were your big. You had some very, very strong leadership in those states that were able to organize and keep things going for several years.
Okay.
And so, and those just happened to be your strong agricultural states. And some of the commodities were a lot more represented. They were in a lot more hurt than some of the others. Peanuts for us has always had a quota system with it, right. And so peanut farming was not really under the bus, so to speak.
Well, and to that point, going back to what you said earlier, we were overproducing. We were growing too much. We flooded the market, and that's the reason peanuts weren't flooding the market, is because you couldn't just, if you wanted to participate, you couldn't just grow as many peanuts as you wanted. They were under a system where the government was regulating, keeping track of the market demand so that you didn't flood the market.
Yeah, you used to have the ASCS office, which was Ag Stabilization and Conservation. That was the S.
Now it's called FSA, Farm Service Agency, Ag Stabilization. Yeah. So I mean, I think that what you're referencing to peanuts is the reason why. But then when that system ended, that's when we started growing peanuts in Texas. Where I am now.
Yeah, they went from the quota system to the base system, and like I said, that's what saved a lot of our folks. And so corn, you could grow whatever you wanted to, and that's what ended up getting a lot of people in a lot of trouble.
Right.
But nowadays, before you even buy the seed, you've got a contract for cotton. You've got a contract for Vidalia onions. You've got a contract for the peanuts. All of your crops. If you don't have a contract, you're going to learn, because you're a high stakes gambler if you don't have somewhere to go with that crop, even before you put it in the ground. Nowadays, God forbid you have a hurricane like Michael that hit us several years ago.
Right. The
fires that we're having in Texas that we seem to have several of, and those kinds of things. Even with those that happen, there's nothing we can do about those, but we can control a little bit of the risk. And so, like I said, that's what you need to do is plan ahead before you even buy the seed.
Because I mean, and it is hard to know. I mean, I know that I don't know very many farmers that aren't, that are brokering their own, selling their own commodities. That some people do that, and I don't know very many of them. That they seem to be pretty smart people. They know what they're doing. I would scare me too, but so they just wanted a fair price. But I just wonder how much of what we're in, the position that we're in now, is replicating some of these things in the past, because it hasn't been the government saying grow more, grow more, grow more. But definitely farmers have been told, the population is going to double, and we need to be growing more. And so maybe instead of more acres, we're growing, for more yield per acre, And now I think the last information I read, even like from the UN, is, population's about to level out and then will decline, and that population will increase. That population will age, and as people age, they eat less. And so I don't know how much. All of these world dynamics impact what our, and that's the thing is, everybody's like, well, we're competing with all over the world, and other countries are helping their farmers so that they can get a fair price. And it feels like we aren't getting that help here.
Yeah, the problem has been the voice of the farmer has gotten smaller, and other people's voices have gotten louder. It just seems like you watch some of the news, and it just doesn't make it doesn't mean anything to me. A lot of the things that they're talking about, and so like I said, you got people that are fighting over crumbs, and like I said, the bread's going to waste, and that's something that the farms you have to go, and that's one of the things that they really had let go of in the 70s. A lot of their voice had been taken away from them, and so they had to claw that back. And what you was talking about, your daddy going to the airport.
DC. Yeah, he went to fly out to DC.
A lot of the farmers went to DC, but a lot of farmers went to areas of the country to talk to farmers. They leave Georgia and go to talk in Kansas and Missouri, and
because you couldn't do what we're doing right now.
Yeah, and a lot of the farmers just thought that they didn't have a voice and they weren't going to be able to accomplish anything. And then I know that one of the farmers that I talked to went to a place called Boneville, Mississippi, and I went through Boneville, Mississippi the other day.
Boneville,
and,
wow!
I don't know where that it was over there around Corinth, I think. And so, like I said, the farmers got together and talked to other farmers, and instead of having the internet, they met, and that's what they had to do. And just so you got you had your crop dusters back in those days, and those farmers also crop dusters also had aircraft that they had the ability to get their hands on.
Yes, right, yeah.
And so they could cut out the middleman, and they could go all over the country with, and they utilized those aircraft and to meet with other folks, and that's how it really picked up in these small areas, where the farmers were. So yeah, that was. But yeah, I talked to a guy the other day. He was in the USDA, and he's the one that came up with the program where the USDA would buy would give you the loan value on your crop, and they set the price. This was in the early 80s, and they would give you money for that crop up to a certain point, and if they sold that crop for higher than that, you got the rest of it too. And basically the USDA was loaning you the money. And he called me, and I talked to him a pretty good while. And I'm going to tell you right now, I slept through economics a day back. Because the things that he was telling me about just went like this. Talking about the early 80s. And he knows, he's still around, and he knows more about this economic situation that we were in. And he, like I said, he was in the USDA when farmers came in, and they shut the doors on them one night, and they left them in there, and in Washington in 78. And
they left the farmers inside. They locked them inside.
They locked them inside. They went to meet with unannounced the Secretary of Ag, and he
slipped out the back door.
He jumped out the window, and and they, hey, how you doing? Who you looking for? We're here to see the secretary. Well, he's not here right now. Well, we'll be here when he gets back.
Oh,
and
my gosh.
And they said, well, how can we reach you? He said, I'll be right here. They're like, no, well, when are you coming back? I will be right here. They never left the building until the USDA secretary came back the next morning. They stayed in the building. They had a sit-in.
Oh my gosh!
And one of the main instigator, the main the guy that was in charge of that deal was from Alamo, Georgia, and I knew him personally. And but he had, obviously this was before I was born, and so that, like I said, it was very special when you start putting things together and seeing
Oh, I
these farmers
bet.
that you
You
knew your
knew.
whole life, but they never did talk about this kind of stuff. And like I said, I just didn't ever
Yeah.
understand why nobody talked about it anymore. Because, but yeah, I talked to this one and that one, and I said, have you ever talked to him about this kind of stuff? And they
Yeah.
never did. They didn't ever talk about this stuff after I started,
So,
back up with it.
so, um, let's talk about outcomes. So, one of the cool things that David told me was about Farm Aid, like say, well, what can we really do? What can we really
Mm-hmm.
do? And which, by the way, Farm Aid gives, I've heard people say, well, they don't give, what do they even do? Where's the money go? Money goes to organizations that help farmers.
Mm-hmm.
And so they don't give it out to individual farmers. That's not the way it works. It goes to organizations to support farmers. And you can look on their website and it tells you all the places that money's going. So, but he said that what they came up with was the need to get all of these farmers together, representatives from all of these regions need to come together. And so, do you know a lot about that piece of it, what they called the Farm and Ranch Congress?
I had never heard that part. I just, I don't know when that came about, but I didn't really come into that in my in any of my research.
So I think that was, if I understand correctly, that was in the 80s
Mm-hmm.
because David said that and I need to have David on the podcast so it can be like direct source and not through an ADD brain. So Farm Aid paid for one farmer to come to St. Louis from every ag county in the United States that wanted to send one. So people got together in their chapters and decided who would go as a representative. And they all came there, and I think there were 800. And he said that they told them, everybody's here wearing your Farm Bureau cap or, whatever organization, your co-op or whatever you're representing. And we'd ask you to take those caps off. And they gave everybody a cap that was white with red letters, and it said Farm and Ranch Congress.
Mm-hmm.
And we want you to put this on because we need you to collaborate and be willing to think of the good of everyone and not just, one organization or one area. And so they split them up, and I think he said into maybe 3 or 4 different working groups. And that is how the they called it the buyout, I think is what they called it. I looked all that up the other day, but ADD. It was basically where they would write down your note. They would write off your note. So all these people that had all this debt, which is interesting to me now because I'm like, everybody's still in the same place, because there was no systematic change. So, everybody just kind of like clean slate, now start over. But he was very actively involved in that, and so were like the law students here at Tech. There was a family that I am definitely going to be interviewing him, and they were in Happy, Texas, which is it's north of here. And he was very involved, like it was because it was like this much paperwork,
Yeah.
so it wasn't easy to do, and they didn't really make it easy, and they didn't make it where actually, that people even knew about it, so it was on the farmers to tell each other that they could do this, and because I'm sure it just added a whole bunch more work to people who were already worked and, overworked and that kind of stuff. But once, the farmers figured out how to do it, how to fill out that paperwork, then they can more easily help each other fill out the paperwork. But if I remember correctly, I believe my parents may have even come up to Lubbock and someone helped them, maybe even I feel like there was like a group of law students from Texas Tech that put together some kind of group, and then that group actually helped to craft some of that process, and so they were able to help farmers a little bit more too. But not very many people were really. There weren't as many people that took advantage of it. And then what David and I looked up, because he was like, I think that bill is, I think that's still there. Well, it's actually not a write down thing anymore, meaning write off thing. It's a restructuring. Mm-hmm. All they'll do now is just restructure and keep people in debt. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same losses. It just seems like, and no gains,
Right.
And it just seems like everybody's added a couple zeros.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. Right. Yeah.
A lot of the folks that I've talked to said there's no way that we could operate with 21.5% interest compared to what we had back in the 70s and 80s. Mm-hmm. But just the other day, they were talking about 2.7% inflation in January. Mm-hmm. Well, what is that, 32% if you multiply it by 12, so that's not good. Yeah. And that's what we were worried with back mm-hmm. in the 70s and the 80s. Mm-hmm. So, we're still having to put up with all these things, mm-hmm. still. The calendars change, but the problem's still there.
Yeah, it really is. Fundamentally, we still have an issue. And I think for people to just understand what it would be like, it's if you owned a store and every person knew what you paid for the price that was on there was mm-hmm. the price that you paid. And it didn't include any markup to take in paying for your electricity, paying for your staff, none of that. It was just the sticker price of what you paid for it. And they could go next door and buy the same thing. And so you are the price taker. You mm-hmm. take what's offered. You aren't the price setter, and so you can then understand, like, hey, if I'm selling something and I have zero profit, and in fact, because they can go next door and they can say, well, I'll go next door, you sell it to me for 75% or 40%. Mm-hmm. 40% of what you have, it listed at, and then, if you don't, I'll just go next door to them. I'll just go somewhere else because we are competing globally. And I will tell you, at the same, I was visiting with, had some Polish exchange farmers here, and we were in a local farm store and looking up grain. Okay, so how much grain, in particular wheat. So first of all, their production is like way more than ours. They're growing lots more bushels per acre. But also their price was almost double what ours was, what they were going to get. And the EU, they invest in their farmers by giving them, grants to pay for half of their equipment, or you need to put in storage. Well, that's a lot of paperwork. Yes, you can fill out a lot of paperwork, but we'll give you money we'll pay for half of it. And it's not this, I think maybe there are loan programs. I don't know, but it's hard to compete.
Yeah. A lot of the farm, well, over there in Poland, I'm keeping up with them, and I cannot imagine being in the United States and having a war right next door to us with the possibility of it spilling over overnight. No. I don't see how you can operate a farm with, some of our crops are 140, 150 days to mature. Mm-hmm. And then you got cattle, you got to get mm-hmm. out on the road with them and things like that. You scared that a drone or something's going to mm-hmm. attack, or you're mm-hmm. going to hit a mine. I saw a farm that was trying to do something over in Ukraine, and they had to run a mine sweeper over the field before they could do anything.
Yeah. Well, people will refer to Poland as the Texas of Europe. Mm-hmm. And Polish people are very resilient, and they have fought in every single global war for freedom. They came to Texas and fought in the Texas Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, they are lovers of freedom, and they have resisted in very unique ways and over the years. But they are also investing in their defense. They know it. You know that it's not a joke to them. It's very serious. The threat that is right next door. They know. I mean, people want Poland, and I know why. I've been there. I want it too. Never mind Greenland.
Because the Poles know what suppression
yes
is. You know,
do.
they've been 1940. You know, overnight. Basically, it's 8 days. They went from freedom to tyranny, and so they know better than we do. You know, we saw across the ocean, but the Poles know what it's like when you lose, and that's the reason why they do what they do.
Yeah. So. Well, this has been great, and we've kind of scratched the surface, and I'm sure we probably left some people scratching their heads, going, "I don't know what you're talking about," but I've enjoyed it, and I've learned a lot, and I'm going to continue to learn about this movement and the moment in time and what we can learn from the past that we can take into this moment in time and learn some lessons from. And we have your information on your book, where they can get your book, which I have a copy of, and actually going to the mountains next week and bringing it with me. So I have a couple of different books to finish, and that is one of them. So I will put all of the links and all of the socials and all that stuff so people can find out more about it.
I appreciate it. And I have enjoyed talking with y'all. I appreciate the invite. And anytime we get to talk to folks about the farmer strike, it's wonderful, because, like I said, it has been so interesting to me for the last 4 years, and it's never ceased to supply me with amazement every time that I make a new discovery about this stuff. You know, meeting a new farmer.
I'm so glad you're doing it. We need to be keeping all this information and passing it down to the next generation. It's really valuable. Thanks,
Absolutely.
Lee. Appreciate it.
I appreciate y'all. Thank y'all.
And thanks, friends, for joining us for this episode of Conservation Stories. And I hope that you will take a moment to go check out Lee's website and support him. You purchase his book and learn more about the agricultural movement, American agricultural movement. And we hope that you will join us again. And if you found it interesting, or you know somebody that was actually part of this movement, share this podcast with them and let them enjoy it as well. Thanks.